In the quiet German town of Rotenburg an der Fulda, surrounded by forests and rolling fields, a man lived a life that seemed unremarkable to his neighbors. His name was Armin Meiwes, a computer technician who fixed machines, helped friends, and blended easily into the background of small-town life. But behind closed doors, he carried a secret fantasy that had haunted him since childhood. A longing not only to consume another person, but to find someone willing to become part of him forever. As a boy, Armin grew up lonely and isolated. His father abandoned the family when he was young, leaving him in the care of a strict, domineering mother. He spent much of his time alone, creating imaginary companions who would never leave him. Out of this loneliness grew a disturbing desire: the idea that the only way to keep someone permanently was to consume them. For years, these fantasies remained locked inside his mind, but when the internet arrived, his isolation collided with new technology that allowed him to connect with strangers who shared unusual desires. By the late 1990s, the internet was full of niche communities, some hidden, some openly accessible. Among them were forums dedicated to extreme fetishes, including cannibalism. It was there that Armin posted a message. He wasn't searching for a victim to abduct, he wasn't looking to deceive. He was looking for a volunteer, someone who would willingly offer themselves to be killed and eaten. His wording was polite, almost clinical. He wanted a healthy man, willing to die, who understood exactly what the arrangement would involve. Most would read such a message and recoil in horror, but incredibly, there were responses. Many who replied did so as part of fantasy roleplay. They would flirt with the idea, but never follow through. But eventually, in early 2001, Armin received a reply from someone who was serious. His name was Bernd Jürgen Brandes, a 43-year-old engineer from Berlin. On the surface, Brandes lived a stable, professional life. But privately, he wrestled with his own desires and demons. He was searching for something final, something irreversible. In his exchanges with Armin, he made clear that he not only accepted the idea of being killed and eaten, he wanted it. The two men began corresponding. Their conversations were explicit, precise, and chillingly calm. They discussed logistics. They talked about how the act would unfold. They negotiated roles, and they agreed that everything would be documented on video, both as proof of consent and as a way to memorialize what was about to happen. This was not a sudden encounter. It was arranged, deliberate, and planned. On March 9, 2001, Brandes boarded a train from Berlin to Rotenburg. He knew he would not be returning. He arrived at Armin's home, a half-timbered house that looked like any other in the town, surrounded by gardens and quiet streets. Inside, the stage was already set. A camcorder had been positioned to capture the events. Alcohol and medication were prepared. The two men sat together, calm, even casual, as if they were about to act out a strange but agreed-upon ritual. The videotape that recorded what happened next has never been released publicly, but investigators and courts later described its contents. It showed that Brandes was not forced. He was not restrained against his will. He willingly participated in the first stages of the act. Hours passed. The combination of alcohol and sedatives left him weaker and weaker until finally, Armin ended his life by stabbing him. For most killers, the act of murder is the climax. For Armin, it was only the beginning. Over the following days, he carefully dismembered the body. He froze portions of flesh, labeled and stored them, and later prepared them as meals. He seasoned the meat with herbs and cooked it in a pan, serving it with potatoes and wine. For him, this was not only about appetite, it was about fulfilling a dream of intimacy, of making another person literally part of himself. For nearly a year, no one knew what had happened. Brandes had vanished from his life in Berlin, leaving friends puzzled but not immediately alarmed. Meanwhile, Armin lived quietly in Rotenburg, occasionally preparing dishes from his freezer, always returning to the sense of satisfaction that he had finally achieved what he longed for. But secrets rarely last forever. By 2002, Armin had grown restless. His supply of flesh was dwindling, and his desire remained. He returned to the internet, once again posting in the same forum, searching for another willing volunteer. This time, his communications attracted suspicion. A student in Austria stumbled upon his posts, disturbed by their detail and their apparent sincerity. The student alerted authorities. On December 10, 2002, police raided Armin's house. What they found confirmed the student's fears. In his freezer were carefully packaged remains. In his home were bones and skull fragments. And most importantly, investigators recovered the videotape. The recording provided undeniable proof of what had happened. Not only that Brandes was dead, but that he had participated willingly, and that the entire process had been planned and staged. When the news broke, the world was horrified and fascinated in equal measure. The idea of consensual cannibalism was almost impossible to comprehend. The story dominated German headlines and quickly spread internationally. Documentaries, tabloid covers, and debates filled the airwaves. For the public, it was a grotesque curiosity. For the courts, it was a nightmare of legal complexity. In December 2003, the trial of Armin Meiwes began. The defense presented an argument unlike any other, that this was not murder, but consensual killing. They pointed to the videotape, which showed Brandes willingly taking part. They argued that under German law, this might qualify as homicide at the victim's request, a lesser offense than murder. Armin himself did not deny what he had done. He calmly described his actions, even his motives, in open court. He spoke of his loneliness, of his desire for someone who would never leave him, of his belief that by consuming Brandes, he had created a permanent bond. In January 2004, the court delivered its first verdict. Armin Meiwes was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. Many in Germany were shocked. How could such an act result in what seemed like a relatively light sentence? But under the legal definitions applied at the time, the court had accepted that consent and intent mattered. The case did not end there. Prosecutors appealed, arguing that the sentence was far too lenient. In 2005, Germany's Federal Court of Justice overturned the verdict and ordered a retrial. The key issue was motive. Under German law, murder requires specific aggravating factors: killing for pleasure, for greed, or for sexual gratification. The higher court believed that Armin's motives met these criteria, regardless of consent. The retrial began in early 2006 in Frankfurt. Expert witnesses, psychologists, and legal scholars were brought in to dissect the case. They examined Armin's fantasies, the role of sexual arousal in the killing, and the broader implications of consent. The defense once again argued that Brandes had chosen this fate willingly, but the prosecution emphasized the evidence from the video and the chats, that Armin's satisfaction was rooted in domination, in sexual fulfillment, and in the desire to possess another human being completely. In May 2006, the court delivered its final judgment. Armin Meiwes was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The message was clear. No matter how much consent is given, a person cannot authorize their own killing. The law drew a line that personal agreements could not cross. In prison, Armin adapted to a new life. Reports describe him as a model inmate. He eventually claimed to have become a vegetarian, as if rejecting the very appetite that had defined his crime. Over the years, he gave interviews, calmly recounting his story, never denying what he had done, and always framing it as a fulfillment of a deep emotional need. The case of the Cannibal of Rotenburg continues to resonate because it sits at the intersection of morality, law, and psychology. It forces us to ask unsettling questions. What does consent really mean? Can someone truly volunteer for their own death? Does loneliness justify acts that society sees as unthinkable? And what role does the internet play in connecting the darkest desires of isolated people? For many, the story remains one of horror, but it is also a cautionary tale about the power of technology to unite people around fantasies that once would have stayed hidden. It is a reminder that loneliness can twist into obsession, that boundaries between desire and destruction can collapse, and that the law must sometimes confront situations it was never designed to handle. Armin's story ends with him behind bars, likely for the rest of his life, but the questions his crime raised are far from settled. They continue to haunt legal scholars, psychologists, and anyone who dares to look closely at the case. It was not a killing born of rage or greed. It was a pact between two men, one who wanted to consume and one who wanted to be consumed. In the end, the court's words cut through the paradox. Consent may shape many human interactions, but love, loneliness, or longing cannot transform killing into anything less than murder. And so the case of Armin Meiwes stands, not only as one of the most disturbing crimes of modern times, but as a mirror reflecting the darkest extremes of human desire and the unyielding line that society draws when confronted with them.